Let's next refactor the getProduct subset function. This will need its own query using limit again, but this time we'll specify two numbers in the limit clause, a row count and an offset. Open the shirts listing page in your browser. This page calls the getProduct subset function, passing in two numbers, the starting shirt for the page and the ending shirt for the page. On page 1 here, it passes in 1 and 8. On page 2, it passes in 9 and 16. On page 3, it passes in 17 as the starting shirt and 24 as the ending shirt. Open the products.php file in your text editor and let's scroll down to the getProduct subset function. Looking at the documentation I wrote for this function, you can see that we receive these two numbers and return an array of shirts corresponding to those two values. We want the function to behave the same way, receiving the same inputs and returning the same output. But instead of getting all the products from the database and then narrowing the list down, we want this function to query the database for just this specific subset of shirts. We'll start by including the database file. Then we'll add our familiar try-catch block. We'll again want to load all the results from our query into a PDO statement object. Our DB object was created in the database include file, so we can call methods on it here. We want to execute a query. We'll be receiving input here, the starting and the ending position, so we'll want to prepare the statement and bind parameters this time. We want to select the same product information as we have in other queries. We want the products ordered by ascending SKU as usual. This query returns all of the products in ascending order. We now want to limit that. If we only specify one number with limit, like this, that number represents the row count. This will limit the result set to only 4 rows. However, we can also specify two numbers like this. If we do that, the first represents the offset and the second represents the row count. The result set normally starts at record 1, so an offset of 10 would move it to record number 11. This query would start at result number 11 and return 4 results, numbers 11, 12, 13, and 14. If we want this query to return shirts 1 through 8, we would specify the limit like this. An offset of 0 would mean start at the first result, and a row count of 8 would mean return the next 8 shirts, number 1, 2, 3, and so on until shirt number 8. If we want the query to return shirts 9 through 16, we would specify the limit like this. An offset of 8 would mean that instead of starting at number 1, we'd start at number 9. A row count of 8 would mean the query would return the next 8 shirts, 9, 10, 11, and so on until 16. Right now, for page 2, we receive the numbers 9 and 16 as arguments for the starting and ending shirt, but we need to convert those into offset and row count values that we can use in our query. Let's start by getting the offset. We take the starting number, which for page 2 would be shirt number 9. Then we subtract 1 from it. If we want to start at 1, the offset is 0, 1 minus 1. If we want to start at 9, the offset is 8, 9 minus 1. For any valid position start value we receive, the offset should be that number minus 1. For page 4, we'll want to start at shirt number 25, and the offset would be 24, 25 minus 1. Let's next get the number of rows. For this, we would take the ending number, which for page 2 would be shirt number 16. We'll subtract from that the starting number. For page 2, that would be a value of 9. Let's see, is that correct? 16 minus 9 is 7, but we want 8 shirts. On page 1, we would have 8 minus 1, which is also 7. I think we need to add one more to this since we'll want to include both the starting shirt and the ending shirt. To calculate the row count, we take the last shirt and subtract from it the first shirt, and then add 1 to make sure that first shirt itself is included. Now in our query, we'll want to use these two values we've calculated. We'll use question marks for placeholders again. Then we'll bind the two parameters to those placeholders. This binds the offset variable to the first placeholder. This binds the row count variable to the second placeholder. The bindParam method by default will assume that the parameter is a string. It will add quotation marks around the values in the SQL query, which is usually okay. However, with limit, these numbers cannot have quotation marks because a limit can only be an integer. The bindParam has an extra argument you can pass it that will force the PDO statement object to treat it like an integer, like this. It's another one of these strange-looking constants on the PDO class itself. You can check out the documentation on the bindParam method for more information about this third argument. Once the parameters are bound, we can execute the query. With this statement, we should have the shirts in that results object. We can now fetch them all into an array. Our function can then return the subset of shirts back to the code that calls it, just like it did before. Let's head back to the shirts listing page. I'll refresh page 3 here. Our refactoring was successful. The shirts displayed here haven't changed. We have modified 3 of our 4 functions that originally called the getProductsAll function to start with the full product list. There's one left to refactor, getProductSearch.